Hello and welcome back to Coming Home Network Presents, where we have conversations about the kind of things people think about when they're exploring the Catholic Church and wondering if they should become a part of it. I'm Matt Swaim, and I'm excited today because we get to talk about some people, and talk to some people rather, from the world of pro baseball about their journeys of faith. If you're looking for support on your own journey, please visit us at CHNetwork.org. We have lots of stories. We have an online community where you can connect with people who are going through what you maybe are going through right now. That's community.CHNetwork.org. And of course, this is all made possible because of generous people who want to help you out on your journey. And if you want to join that group of people, go to CHNetwork.org/donate. And you can find out more information there. So, I've loved baseball as long as I can remember, even though I was terrible at it. My love for broadcasting came from watching and listening to Marty Brennaman and Joe Nuxhall do Reds games growing up. So my love of baseball kind of got me into Catholic media down the road. That's not as impressive as the people I'm about to talk to who have played the game. So we've got today Wade and Neena Gaynor and Dan Venezia. We won't have time to get into their full conversion stories, but if you want to read more, Neena has done a written version of her conversion story, her journey to the Catholic Church, at Coming Home Network's website. So has Dan Venezia, and you can go read more about them there. There's a lot in both of those stories. Wade's going to write his up one day. Wade, Neena, Dan, welcome. All right, so I have a lot of questions. Some of them are about baseball. Some of them are about theology. Some of them overlap. But I'm going to start with Wade because I know the least about his journey. So let's just start, first of all, by talking about how you got into baseball and how you got your opportunity to kind of play at the pro level.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Matt. For me, I loved baseball for as long as I can remember. I don't know if Dan's got a similar story, but from the time I was 3-4 years old, if I got a glove, I would sleep with it. I'd wake up, want to throw a ball, hit a ball. And I grew up in a very small town. There's 8,000 people in our whole county. So we're in the Western Kentucky, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And for me, everything I did was with baseball in mind. So I got an opportunity to play high school baseball, of course. I did well there. And I got a scholarship to go to Western Kentucky University. So Bowling Green's about an hour and 30 minutes from my hometown. And actually, I played with Neena's brother there. He was a fifth-year senior my freshman year. And that's where we met. And for 3 years, I played for the Toppers and was drafted in the third round by the Detroit Tigers in 2009. So that was kind of a quick summary, but that was the route I took in getting into the minor leagues.
By Toppers, you mean Hilltoppers, I'm assuming.
The Hilltoppers, that's right. So
just to make sure, as a fellow Kentuckian, I just want to make sure we're clear on our terms here.
That's right.
For the non-Kentucky crowd.
It's the Hilltoppers.
So you were in the Tigers organization. Dan, if you could kind of sum up a little bit of your own sort of path to the pro baseball level.
Sure. I mean, hearing from Wade there, our paths are similar yet quite different. Growing up in a big city, he had 8,000 people. I grew up in the city with 8 million people in New York City. So I grew up playing stickball in the street. I mean, we played sewer to sewer. I mean, literally in the street. Police officers would stop and actually pinch hit and jump in. It was a different time. We were inclusive. We made up our own rules. We held each other accountable for those rules. And, if we all chipped in, for a Spalding or a blue rubber ball, and if it went up on the roof that, lined our Brooklyn streets, we'd have to climb it to get that ball. And, so that's where my love developed, playing with my older brothers. I'm the youngest of four, 2 older brothers, and I was sort of tagging along. And, when we were able to get a mitt and a real bat, we went down and found a patch of grass somewhere, not a whole lot where I grew up in Brooklyn. It was a concrete field most of the time in the schoolyard. And then, my love of just as Wade described, hitting and throwing anything baseball just brought me tremendous amount of joy. Took my baseball high school team to a city championship, which got to be played at Yankee Stadium, which was pretty cool at 17 years old, the old Yankee Stadium. And then got a scholarship to a small Division II school in Westchester County, Concordia College, where I played 4 years of baseball, and then fulfilled, that dream. Every kid who steps foot on a little league field has dreams of one day playing in the big leagues and getting drafted by the Twins. I was a low round draft pick, again, a lot different from Wade, and 36 round pick. It was 1993. That was the year A-Rod was the first pick in the draft. Torrey Hunter was our first pick in the first round. He became my roommate, my good friend, and a fellow brother in Christ, by the way. And then I played parts of 3 seasons in their organization. And, at that moment, baseball had brought me both the best moment and the worst of my life. The best getting the call, and then the worst being sent home. But since then, my love for Christ has completely trumped all of that. But that's the 2-minute version of my story.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, so many people who get to the pro level get a cup of coffee in the big leagues, and then you got guys like Torrey Hunter, who I feel like retired like really recently. Was in the league for forever and just played all over the place. It's a really interesting phenomenon, the whole baseball world. So this is where I actually get to ask a question of Neena, and that is, when you of course you had a brother who was playing at the college level, but you married a person who had gotten drafted. Like, what did you think that was going to mean for you?
I really didn't know, and Wade and I hadn't started dating until after he got drafted, of course. But, I think everybody kind of imagines something shiny and bright and wonderful with baseball and professional athletics. And there were those moments, but most often our experience was not really that. Minor league baseball is kind of known for the grind, and it's not just for the guys, but also for the families that they bring along with them or that are also at home. But, it was a beautiful journey, and we're just so thankful to have been a part of that.
All right, so let's back up a little bit then and look at, now that we kind of know where you got at the professional level, like, we'll do it around the horn. I'm going to apologize for all the baseball puns that probably come up here, but Wade, where was your faith journey like through the course of this process? Like, what was your relationship with God? What kind of like churches were you a part of, if any?
One thing to touch on what Dan was talking about, that's one of my favorite things about the game of baseball is I grew up with my dad telling me, try to hit the ball over the barn in the side yard, on 20 acres, which sounds like maybe to somebody from a city like a lot, but it's kind of normal here. And to hear him playing stickball in the streets, and then we all get thrown in the same clubhouse. That's what I miss a lot of the different backgrounds. But to answer your question, for as long as I can remember, the Lord's called me to Him. So I was very, very blessed with an amazing family. We were in church, I tell everybody 8 days a week, and from the time I was little, and we went to the Methodist church here in Hallsville, Kentucky. So it was really a charmed childhood, and it was always easy. I had a good father, so it was easy for me to relate to or to understand a little bit God being that father. And my extended family, everyone, we were all very close. Our church family was very close. And even through college, even whenever you're kind of going wayward or going down some roads that you really shouldn't, that call back to Christ was always very strong for me. And whenever Neena and I met, really, she, I think I helped bring her closer to Christ, and then she also helped me get closer to Christ. So even throughout my playing career, Dan mentioned Torrey Hunter. We were in the same Bible study with Torrey and his wife, which is really cool. Back in 2014 and 15, I think, when he was with the Tigers in spring training. So it's just awesome to have this conversation. And for me, the Lord's always been part of my life, and I'm very grateful for that. It makes for a somewhat boring testimony sometimes, but it's the truth.
Hey, I work in the conversion story industry, and let me tell you, there's no such thing as a boring testimony. Like, the weird little things that might not matter to you are like fascinating to other people. But Neena, while we're on Wade's story, I know just enough about you to know that we are from the same part of Kentucky, and where we are is where Asbury College is, where we're from. And that's a Methodist pocket in Baptist country. So where were you faith-wise when you met Wade?
Well, when I met Wade, I was kind of church hopping and shopping and trying to figure out. And then when I married Wade, Wade told me I was a Methodist. And, and so that's kind of where we landed. But the beauty and also something that was difficult about baseball is that Wade was playing baseball every Sunday morning. You know, at noon there was a game. So he was at the field when most churches are having their services. And so I would attend alone often. And just by, coincidence and some conversations, I had started attending a Baptist church in Florida, which was just really instrumental in forming me and shaping me and drawing me to the Lord and teaching me so much. Because as we were talking last night, that was the first time in my life that I had no school, no job, no babies, no nothing. And I just got to focus on my relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's kind of what I did those first little years that we were married. And it was in a kind of hodgepodge of all different sorts of churches, but Jesus was definitely always with us.
Yeah. How about you, Dan?
Yeah. So my faith, again, there's some contrast here. I was a cradled Catholic. Then I was dragged, by my mom, thankfully. I thank God for that. And then I was lost. So during my time in professional baseball, I call that my lost phase. And we pray for that on a daily and weekly basis, those that are lost in the hope of the resurrection. So those prayers were answered because I did find my way back and home for a long time, for 20 plus years, but I was lukewarm. You could sit in the back row of a church and throw your money in the basket, never being connected to the liturgy, to the community, and to what's most important, that sacrifice reenacted, on Calvary, that the Eucharist. And so now I'm starting to get it. And I don't want to say I'm on fire, but I'm certainly my conversion is ongoing. And so while I was playing professional baseball, I had enough of the church and the rules, and I wasn't attending mass. I was a 2-time-a-year Catholic, Christmas and Easter. And as you know, when you're playing baseball on Sundays, there wasn't Christmas on Easter either. So I got caught up in the Bible study group, and I don't want to knock it because I think it was important. And on the road and at home, we had a pastor who, you broke open the Word and you had the Bible, and I always had Jesus in my heart, thanks to my mother who had instilled that love of Christ in my siblings and in me at a young age. So I was searching for something during those baseball days, especially during a struggling time, when you're hitting over the Mendoza line at 200 and you're praying to the Lord. Probably I was praying for good pitches to hit and for a higher batting average at the time. But I was lost, and I found my way back home. And now, I think that's what your network named my story, The Sacrifice That Brought Me Home. And I could tell you this, that I know the difference between joy and happiness now. And, I thought baseball brought me joy. That's just happiness. The Lord, my family, and everything that has to do with God and the church and the truth and Our Lady, that's what brings me a tremendous amount of joy.
Well, just, the sacrifice that brought me home, I wrote that headline because I was like, I have a chance to write a baseball headline. Please just let me run with this. Okay, so there's so many things in here, but one of the things that I think is important to really talk about is, well, you both mentioned that there was opportunities for Bible studies in these clubhouses, which probably have Catholics, Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists, people from big cities, people from small towns. So these opportunities exist. I don't think that's kind of a hidden piece of baseball. It's not something that people are super vocal about unless they win the game and somebody asks them, what were you thinking on that 3-2 pitch? And they say, well, first of all, I want to thank God, but I was expecting a slider, and so I mean, you see, that's the piece where you hear the faith part, but it's so much deeper. From the few players that I've had a chance to talk to. But the other component about this is you guys have a unique experience of divisions within Christianity that not everybody has, because a lot of people are like, well, should I go to this church in my town or should I go to that church in my town? When you're touring around playing in different towns every time, I mean, how did that highlight for you that, like, there really are kind of like differences between Christians, and Neena, you wrote about this, like there really are some things that like kind of set us apart, and there's a felt need for maybe some stability somewhere, some authority.
For me, the baseball chapel was instrumental. Like the women that ministered to me and our children and Wade, because I don't think a lot of people realize how apart couples are in baseball. And so Wade would go for a 12-game road trip, and I would be stuck in a foreign city, not knowing anybody, having no friends. Sometimes there was another wife in town, but most of the time we were the young, we married young, so we were like the seemingly old couple for all the teams that Wade was playing with. And so I was there by myself quite often, and I would get connected through Baseball Chapel to the different churches that those women attended. And it was just amazing, whether it was, my baby's sick, where do I take my child to the doctor, to we're moving yet again, but I'm 7 months pregnant and I have an 11-month-old who's going to help me pack our bags because Wade's already gone. It was just the way that people showed up and were the hands and the feet of Christ. We joined, I don't want to say we joined a bunch of churches, but we participated in all kinds of churches and saw just the beauty that, God's people really are.
That community. Mm-hmm. It was our community.
Mm-hmm.
As we were away.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It led to our conversion. This whole thing of Baseball Chapel and then traveling a lot and then questioning, why is it good to go to church and actually be there and not just watch it? And all these different questions that, we can talk about as we go here. But all that great community that we had, that God gave us while we were going through this, totally not realizing we'd one day be Catholic at all at this time. That was kind of like my last couple of years playing, that all started. But they were really great, especially like Neena was saying, I'd be gone for a couple of weeks or a month. I got sent up and down a lot the last few years between AAA and AA. So, she was alone often.
It's interesting. So, if you're a Methodist from small town Kentucky and you move to a new town, you go where you find the best preacher, and you settle in, maybe the best music, maybe the best youth group or fellowship, maybe the best, men's group. Dan, you're in a different spot because if you're a cradle Catholic, like it doesn't matter what town you're in, you know what church you're supposed to go to, right? It's whatever one has Saint so-and-so in the title. But again, you said this was during your lost years. At the same time, though, baseball is kind of one of the most, it has the most visible elements of Catholicism of like any professional sport except maybe soccer, because half these dudes are like crossing themselves on the way to the plate, right? There's so many players from like Catholic countries that have come to the United States and have brought those family traditions, that faith with them, and some people might be cynical and say, oh, that's superstition. But for some of these people, it's very real. So I wonder if you maybe, saw these guys making the sign of the cross around you and saw these people wearing rosaries around. I mean, did any of that like trigger anything in you or make you think about things during that lost period of time?
No, I had a picture of Jesus inside my hat. In fact, I have it down here on one of my monitors, and a cross. And I would give it a kiss, before every time out on the field. But it was just generic. Like I had Jesus. Jesus was with me, but I didn't want anything to do with the church and the rules. And that's because I was living a life of sin, right? And I think that's what happens when the devil gets a hold of you and gets his grip on you. He wants to make you feel like you're not worthy. And so for a long time, when I'd go to church and I'd hear the priest say some things, I was hearing something very different, that, I don't belong here. I'm not worthy because of many of much of the sinful behavior that sort of consumed me during those years. It's kind of hard we're all sinners, of course, right? But it's kind of hard to be following the Lord and in the book and in the word and in the sacraments and continue with that sin. I heard, I believe it was through one of the apparitions that the Blessed Virgin had said that, you'll either stop that sin or you'll stop praying the rosary. And what I've found recently, because I've only come to know her in this loving, wonderful, spiritually motherly love that just over the last couple of years. And that's where my conversion and my faith has taken a turn, because she's revealed to me crosses that I didn't even know I had to bear. But at that time, I wasn't thinking much about it. I was so focused on one-sided, clear-sighted on my goal to get to the big leagues. And God was secondary. I prayed and I had the Bible out, but it was sort of, I was going through the motions, checking the box. But it wasn't until I really found myself back in the church, especially in the sacraments and with confession, for instance. I would confess to God behind the door, privacy of my own bedroom door, dozens of times, breaking down because I was told that I had a direct line. And we do have a direct line, but when it comes to that beautiful sacrament of reconciliation, it's not the priest, it's Jesus. So I can tell you from being on both sides of that is that once I came back home, thank you, Matt, for that great title. Once I came back home and I laid it at the foot of the cross and I forgave myself for all the pain that I've caused me and others. And I laid it at the foot of the cross. Jesus wrapped his arms around me. And that I only had to do once. And I go to frequent confession, but I mean about, a sin that's been weighing you down that you try to tuck away in your back pocket. You pretend that it never happened and you're embarrassed and you got shame and guilt. And it did not work. If you got to keep going back, that means it wasn't working. So I found the truth in the Catholic Church that I was so, blessed to be born into. Yet I took it for granted and I left. But I think we have a patient God and a patient Mother in heaven that doesn't matter when we get there, as long as we get there.
Yeah. So we got you back to the church. And I encourage people actually to go check out Dan's story because a lot of it has to do with like your experience of COVID and like a really harrowing experience of COVID that really got your attention. But you're back, but we haven't figured out how Wade and Neena finally got in. So who wants to tell the story out of you two about like what really kind of like shifted the balance and steered you towards the Catholic Church?
Our church was going a little wayward, we'll say, and in a lot of different ways. And it was all very confusing why it was happening and kind of unsettling because we had like this deep foundation, like deep roots that were kind of being uprooted. So in my quest to figure out why, I mean, this sounds funny, but this is just the truth of our story, why we're pro-life and why abortion's not okay. It was like, well, just saying it's not okay isn't really good enough for me. I want to know why, and really go deep. So I got online and I found this book called The Gospel of Life written by Pope John Paul II. And I called it my Pope book as kind of as a joke because I didn't dislike Catholics. I just thought poor Catholics don't know much about their faith, and I don't understand it either, and it's really, confusing. But I started reading this book on the road trips. I'm just sitting there reading it, and I was calling Neena and saying, this is incredible. Like, I actually didn't really know. If you said, who's John Paul II, I would have known, like any global figure, but I really didn't know anything about him. And I started reading that, and I was just, I'm writing down all these things he's saying, and it was just incredible. So then around that same time, we had our first child, and we had been going all over the place, and Dan brought up the sacraments, and the sacraments in the Bible led us to the Catholic Church, like 100%. 100%. And we had our first child, and we were like, well, do we dedicate him to the Lord or do we baptize him? And we took that very, very, very seriously. It was not some, hey, well, this preacher said we should do this, so we're just going to do it because we don't really care or know. It was a big deal to us. I thought, man, I know there's just one baptism. I know I was baptized as an infant. She was not. And we started going to the Word because we kind of didn't trust anything except the Bible. I mean, we were total fundamentalists. And we're reading, and I was like, we've got to baptize our child. Like, he's under our roof, and he's going to be in a Christian community, and he's going to be baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Like, this is happening. So he was baptized in the Methodist church. And we just started asking, why do we feel that way? You know, and then it led to sacrifice, and then it led to communion, and we were like, well, we need to find a church that has communion every Sunday, that baptizes infants, and Dan brought up confession, and I'm obsessing with the Bible. Neena actually was concerned with me for a little bit. But I'm a baseball player, so I have nothing to do in the off season but work out and read. So that's what I did. And she was working, and I was watching our newborn. So I was like, confession's a good thing too. And I'm skipping over a few things because it's a really great story. But Neena's kind of already there. Am I right? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I had no qualms about it. You know, I had a lot of questions, but I just figured, you know, the Lord will work it out as we go. But
I was much more obstinate
in everything. But
that's true.
But you know, it was the Lord just so gently kind of pushed us towards Him and His holy church, and so we were living in what would have been closer to my hometown in central Kentucky. And God just made it like not a friendly place, like for our family. Like Wade was working and gone more than he ever was with baseball.
And Dan will appreciate this. You know, I had an awful year the last year of my contract. So I played 7 years with the Tigers. I was in AAA, doing well. And I got sent down to AA. And then I got sent up and down 6 times in 1 year. And I got done. And by the end of the year, I hit like 200. And had like 10 home runs total. Nothing was good. And I didn't know if I was going to keep playing or what, but we needed insurance because we were about to have our second kid. So I got a job at a warehouse. Like I was driving by and I saw Now Hiring, and I was like, well, insurance runs out 7 days after the last game of the World Series, which is really funny, but it's how it works. So I'm in a warehouse. The Tigers call me back, say they want me to go back to Erie, which is AA. And we prayed about it, and it just wasn't going to happen. You know, I told them what I needed to make, and they said, well, we'll pay you what you made last year, which is really funny because at that time they'd kind of changed it, made it a little better. You know, I made like $15,000 the year before. I was like, I got 2 kids. Like, this is not going to, that won't work. I know we live in Kentucky, but it's not that cheap to live here. So, anyways, we're in kind of limbo. And I'm at church one Sunday drinking coffee, and they pass around the communion plate. And I just let it pass. Started crying. And I was like, why did I just let that pass? Like, why?
Because we were finally in a church that had communion every service. We had community.
But he stood up there and he said, this is just a symbol. And it was really, I don't like to pick apart denominations because a lot of us led us to who we are and our relationship with the Lord. But I was like, I can't say that or agree to this. And this would be affirming that. So that led to, we went home and we laugh about it. And Neena was like, what's wrong? You know? And I was like, we need to find a Protestant church that has the Eucharist. And that's where it started.
That's a fairly fruitless search, by the way.
I figured there was
a long
one,
time.
And I asked people that I like really still to this day love and respect. I was like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. What you got on this? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one that's read John 6. And, you know, and they're like, well, I mean, you know, Anglican and Lutheran and Episcopalian, they're all kind of close. And I was like, yeah, but it's not the same. And I'm talking a lot, so I apologize, but I'm almost there. We went to a Catholic service.
Well, God moved us again.
We moved.
And we moved to kind of like, I don't want to call it like a Catholic hub, but there's a lot of Catholics here. It's the first time ever that we'd ever been challenged by Catholics. And
yeah, that's right.
And those people, they're like, well, just try it. Just go in Sunday and sit there and see. And they're the first Catholics, again, that we would talk to about Scripture, and they would like shake their head and like give us not a rebuttal, but also give us God's word back to us. And so then we went one Sunday.
She's right. That's right. I was giving baseball lessons to a couple kids, and the dad said, well, you need to go to church with us. And I fired off with the typical why I'm not Catholic, and he like really served it right back to me pretty firmly. And it was the first time, and I was probably 28, 29 at the time, 30. First time in 28 or 30 years that a Catholic had defended their faith to me, ever. I mean, usually you make one comment and it's kind of like, I'm just not going to talk anymore. And this guy was like, he wasn't having that. And I am forever grateful of that. And he even went on the offense with me. And then he started sending me all kinds of links, all kinds of books. And he gave me Rome Sweet Home by Scott Hahn, who kind of speaks my language, given our background. And we went to Mass one evening, and we did not make fun of it, but we left and said, what in the world just happened? Like, we didn't, our kids were crying. It was nighttime. I'm used to Sunday mornings.
Yeah. And
then we went back to another church, and then a couple weeks later, she was like, I want to go.
I want to try it again.
To Mass. And we walked in,
and I started weeping.
She starts crying because of the Psalms, and I got emotional whenever they started singing. I saw water flowing from the right side of the temple.
Somebody was being baptized that day. I mean, it was the whole picture God had prepared our eyes for it, for that moment. And when we stepped in, I just knew instantly. But then I also knew that it wasn't going to be easy, because we still had a lot of questions. We still had a lot of hang-ups, and the journey was, a lot of people say,
that was the beginning.
Just beginning.
That's right.
But, all of our lives up to this point, it was a preparation for this moment too.
Yeah, we went through RCIA, and it was the springtime, so we kind of missed Easter. And we were baptized on All Saints Day because we kept telling our priest, like, we're ready. We're really ready. This is not a joke. And we want our other child baptized. And the last hang up to Dan, I appreciate you talking about the Blessed Mother. That was my biggest hang up. And one day, this is kind of a miraculous story. But I was driving, and it was a week before we were going to stand in front of God and everybody and say, we believe everything the Catholic Church says and holds is true. And I was like, I can't do that, because the Blessed Mother's got me I'm not really down for all that, is what I was thinking. And I was praying while I was driving. So, Lord, I don't want to offend you. I don't want to put someone up there with you that shouldn't be, and pray to anyone but you. And, it wasn't a voice from heaven, but if you've had God speak to your heart, you know his voice. And he said, who are you to tell me who I can and cannot glorify in heaven? Verbatim. And I just sat there, and I was like, I would never do that. And he's like, that's what you're doing right now.
Wow. That's pretty cool. See, you do need to write this up now, Wade, for so many reasons. Because Dan's got some pretty nice matching Blessed Mother stuff late in his journey as well. But I've got some questions. Now that we've got you kind of both back to the sacraments or into the church, that fascinate me about both of your journey. And I'm going to start this one on Dan. Because Dan, you said that your mother drug you to church, but you weren't interested in the rules, and you weren't interested in all the regulations and the whatever, all that stuff. What would happen, Dan, in a baseball game if someone, violated some minor rule and the umpire let it go? Like, would you be okay with that? Like, in your baseball life, I mean, didn't you revolve so much of your life around particular adherence to the rules? And wouldn't you upset it if somebody from the other team didn't acknowledge the rules correctly? Like, isn't it? I just find that like a strange contrast.
Absolutely. Baseball's a game of rules, but I never made the connection between baseball and religion at the time. You know, I see it clearly now. But it was more to me than just going away from the rules. It was because I was so entrenched, not only in my own goals and dreams, but in sin. And I think that was it. It was just it was hard for me to sit in church and you know, again, the devil had his grip on me because I felt like a hypocrite. How can I be here? You know, I'm not worthy to be here. I don't belong here. And, you know, in my journey, you talk about RCIA, Wade, you know, the interesting part is my wife grew up Protestant. And when her mother died at a young age, 2 years before I met my wife, my wife was converted. She was brought into the church, and went through the RCIA program. Young priest did it. And, he's our current pastor, by the way. He's our Monsignor, and, he married us. And, now I'm a teacher in the RCIA program. So you talk about being, you know, full circle. Just yesterday, I'm in daily mass in New York City. And I think this is to your point on the Eucharist, Wade. And, I see a young fellow in the front row. And this is the middle of the afternoon. I had an hour break in between clients. And it was unique. He was African American. He was young, and he was in the front row, and he didn't quite know when to kneel. So he wasn't kneeling at the right time. And God placed this on my heart. I'm like, this fellow is discerning. He wants to be in this church. And I knew he wasn't going to go up for communion, because if he didn't know when to kneel, and the communion comes and he sat there and he didn't go up. And so after church was over, I can see this yearning in his heart. Like he wanted to be in that game. I mean, to me, that's the World Series, right? Getting up there and receiving Christ. We can do that every day as Catholics. And, so I stayed after, and I just said, "Hey, you looking to come into the Catholic Church?" And he said he moved into the neighborhood. He's been baptized, but a fellow brought him into church and invited him. And he's in the RCIA program now, and he's going to receive the Eucharist at the Easter Vigil. And, you know, I gave him my card if I can help him in any way, but that warmed my heart. And I can't help but think, Wade and Neena, I mean, you guys now can be and I'm sure you are, great evangelists. And because now you know the Bible, right? I think it was Scott Hahn that said, it might have came from St. Augustine, that, you know, they have the menu, we have the meal. I've heard Scott Hahn say that often. But now, because you've been on both sides and I've been on both sides, I find it easy because you can defend the Bible because you know it inside and out. And now you can defend the church because it's one and the same. It's not just tradition. It's tradition and truth, spirit and truth, as Jesus said. And it's all one. The one holy Catholic and apostolic church, which when we said that creed, when I was lost, I would refrain. I wouldn't say that because I've been to so many other churches and I felt like, well, what about the rest of them? But if you can go to Google on this one, who founded the Catholic Church? Jesus Christ. And it's the only church he founded. All the other churches are founded by men. And again, I don't say this to knock them because I'm sure they're all on fire for the Lord and I'm not to judge, but I know I wanted to find the truth and I found it and it was right under my nose the whole time. And I'm a little upset that it took me, you know, half a century to get there, but I'm grateful I'm here.
It's awesome. I have another question, sort of related to confession. Because this is a big part of both of your stories. And Dan, you've mentioned especially a few minutes ago, like how much you appreciate that idea of, you know, being able to sacramentally like experience the presence of Christ in the confessional. But I've wondered this. I've asked this of a few athletes and I've gotten different kinds of answers, but in order to confess well, you got to examine your conscience, right? You got to really take an honest, hard look at yourself. You got to play back the tape, right? You got to slow it down. You got to think like, what did I do? I got to do that as a layman, but I kind of wonder how that works in the life of a baseball player because these days, every time somebody strikes out and goes back to the dugout, somebody hands them an iPad and they go and slow down all of their swings and like look at their forearm movement. They look at where the back foot was doing. Like, did any of like the going back through and analyzing, you know, every single muscle movement, has any of that helped you when you think about like going through to examination of conscience, or am I just reaching on this one?
Well, I know if you're talking about baseball and the church and prayer and the sacraments, it's like when I talk to some folks and we kind of go back and forth and debate, like talking about the Rosary or the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and it's often said, "Well, you're just memorizing that and not really praying," which maybe sometimes, but I think that's a reach. And I'll say, well, if I'm putting a ball on a tee, I'm hitting hundreds of those, thousands of those, repetition. And sometimes I'm working on one little thing. And sometimes I'm just swinging because I want to feel it. And that's one of the greatest metaphors for me with prayer and the sacraments is, the sacraments, we talk about this all the time. I could never leave the church now that I've experienced the Eucharist and confession. There's plenty more, but those two, to be able to go and receive that grace that's so needed, and not to mention the spiritual warfare that keeps you from going to confession, whether it's a scheduling issue or you just really don't want to. There's a lot that I think we all would nod our heads and say, oh yeah, I need to go to confession, and then it'll be 2 weeks later, you still haven't gone. There's always something coming up. But just that repetition, and I think about hitting off the tee or being in the cages, and Dan, how much time do you spend in a cage as a ball player? We're all cage rats, that's like what you call it, because you just live in there, and you're just taking those swings because you're training your body to where you don't have to think when the time comes. You just react, and that's where I really see the connection.
I agree there with the repetition. You talked about confession, but it plays into the Rosary for sure, and repetition is the mother of skill, right? Hundreds of ground balls a day, hundreds of swings. You don't even count them. And it's the same thing. And that's what the irony is. That's why I was against the Rosary for so long. It just didn't make sense to me. It was like, why so many Hail Marys? I'd say one Hail Mary a night and think that was sufficient. Well, we don't take one swing off the tee, right? Or one ground ball.
Right.
An NBA player's not taking one foul shot. And when you do it, and again, I've yet to pray the perfect Rosary. In fact, I've yet to meet a religious person who has, even a priest who's prayed the perfect Rosary, because my mind wanders, and sometimes I'll get a decade right, and other times my mind's off to thinking about what's for dinner. I heard once a priest said, if you fall asleep praying the Rosary, your guardian angel will finish it for you. Another priest told me that the Holy Spirit will finish it for you. What I say is pray it early so you don't fall asleep. But repetition, is important. So I'm over that. And just to add to what Wade said, the Eucharist and confession, those are really the sacraments, and Our Lady are really what separates us from our Christian brothers and sisters. And we have so much more that we have in common, right? I like to stick to the common ground, but those are significant when you're all in. And Wade said earlier about feeling that he was putting someone else up close to God. It's a misconception with our fellow Christian brothers and sisters. And that may have been a product of what you've learned prior, but we're not worshiping her. It's just a devotion. It's a love. She acts as an intercessory. Just like I'd say, hey, Matt, my wife's sick. Can you pray for her? It's the same. We're just asking Mary to pray for us, put in a good word for us. And God's not going to be upset with that. The graces that she's given me in the last, year and a half, because I pray it daily now, and not just one, but all 4 of them. So I call that a grand slam, and not to brag, but I just can't get enough of it. One was not enough. I can't wait, every 4th day to think about him being nailed to the cross. I need to reenact that in my mind every day to remind myself that those nails were meant for me, and that he paid a debt that he didn't know, one that we could never repay. And it's all paid in full, right? And then we get to go to that beautiful sacrament and lay it all in front of Jesus and be absolved, and then, go and sin no more. And what I like to say is, as I get older, I'm not sinless, but I'm sinning less. And, that's the journey. And I think, again, I think Wade will agree. Our World Series, man, is heaven. We're just, we're just floating through. This is just a regular season for us.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So I have a few more things for you before we let you go, but I wanted to just say some parallels. I've always thought that baseball is the most Catholic sport. It's certainly the most Christian sport, and I can argue that on another level, but it's easier for me to argue it on the Catholic things. One would be that baseball has a sense of both individual salvation and communal salvation, in the sense that it matters that you own your faith, but you can't do it alone. You're part of a church. Just like a baseball team has to win as a team, but everybody's got to stand at the plate by themselves. So that's one thing. Another thing is that liturgically speaking, just like baseball, the Mass understands that there's an important interplay between sound and silence. Like baseball is like the only sport that cares about silence. It's the only sport you can listen to on the radio, and some guy will just stop talking for like 12 seconds and just let you hear the crowd or hear nothing if nobody's at the game, right? So I got that. Another thing is baseball's got the best sense of the communion of saints of any sport. Whenever they do the NFL Ring of Honors or like the Hall of Fame and whatever, and they announce who's in the Hall of Fame this year, I'm like, I know like two of those guys. Mm-hmm. You ask me who's in the Hall of Fame for any Major League Baseball team, everybody knows. Like, everybody knows the players in their hometown who are in the Hall of Fame, right? It's like, I can't just say, like, names of big players from the 90s and you can be like, yeah, I never heard of that guy. No, you know Bo Jackson, right? You know King Griffey, you know all these guys. And then finally, this analogy doesn't work very well because of what the NFL has done to their schedule. But back in the day, NFL, you got the early game on Sunday, the late game on Sunday, and then you got one game during the week. Baseball, you got every day of the week, just like you got the Mass. But now that the NFL's kind of messed with the schedule, it doesn't work as well with that analogy. So my last thing here before I get into the lightning round is, do you have any questions for each other? Based on what the things that you've heard each other say about your experience, or like, Neena as well, like experience of like Dan's family trying to make it through as a baseball family?
I would just say, Dan, don't you feel like we kind of already know each other a little bit, because we've like Dan kept talking about, well, I didn't really put that together. You're so locked in on performance, and I hope it didn't come across. We were talking about our conversion, not me being a choir boy and us having no issues or anything like that. It's just you're consumed. You don't think about, like, people when they see a pro athlete mess up in just a heinous way, and you're at home going, how did that happen? Like, what was he doing? You're blind. You're blindsided. You've got blinders on, and whatever happens is okay, because all you care about is the next game. So I appreciated Dan talking about that aspect a little bit.
Yeah, no, I feel like I know you guys. As Matt pointed out, as one of your analogies there or contrasts, is that as Catholics, we never journey alone. Our support for one another is a life support. It's encouraging. And Matt, I think you left out the cathedral. Nice big league stadium. Looks
baseball
like
stadiums. They're the cathedral.
Come on.
Well, you played at Yankee Stadium. I mean, come on. So. Yeah, there's so much. Wade, I can't help but be amused by the way that you put that. It's so funny that, like, us unathletic people will call into sports radio after somebody goes like 0 for 3, and I was on like a 21, game streak without a hit, having a bad day, and you're like, yeah, that guy's terrible. I'm like, that guy could like crush it on your church softball team, and you would be embarrassed to be in the same field with him. So, any other questions for Dan? Do you have any questions for Wade or Neena before we let you move on to this next little?
Yeah, I'm intrigued, man. I think your relationship, I can tell, is Christ centered, and when you have Christ at the center of your relationship, that's a foundation that cannot be cracked. That's an eternal friendship and love that you guys will have forever. So that's something that my wife and I have now, but we had different paths and we kind of came together where you sort of went on the journey from the beginning and, you found the truth and, they made it home too, Matt. So we're grateful to have you. And I think that many more will come home to our church just from hearing from you. So don't by any means be shy about expressing your love for not only for Jesus, but his mother and for our church and for the truth. And you'll be surprised that you'll be that guy, right? That brought you in. You plant those seeds and you never know who else is going to come along and water them. And we don't always get to see the fruits of that, that seed bear fruit because it is a ripple effect. But sometimes God reveals it to us and he's been so prevalent in my life. I've been able to see so much over a short period of time. And it's because it's of the surrender. When you surrender yourself and you give yourself to the Lord, the baseball becomes insignificant and, you make it happen. And by the way, Wade, you said 15,000. I didn't make more than 6. I think the most I made was $950 a month for 6 months. So that's less than $6,000.
They bumped it up a little bit.
You were rich, man.
So people get so excited about that short opportunity in the big league if they can get it, right?
That's right.
That being said, my last question is actually not theological at all. It has to do with the fact that, minor league baseball it's a grind. It's like anytime I go to more minor league games than I do major league games because I live in the DC area and it's impossible to get in and out of the Nats park. Back when I was in Reds country, you could just go down in an afternoon and be like, yeah, I think we're going to go to a baseball game today. And you'd be home by like 10:30. I love minor league baseball. I love the guys, the passion, the things that they're trying to do and the ways they're trying to like do their best. But one of the things I love most about minor league baseball is the team names. And Wade, I heard you say you played for Erie. Is that the Seawolves?
Seawolves and AA. That's right. That was our AA affiliate. Still is.
All right. So, what are some of the other great minor league team names that you played on or could have gotten bounced to if you'd stayed in longer?
Well, I was fortunate, and I say that kind of as a joke, to play at every level, some of them more than once. So the Oneonta Tigers, I was on the last Oneonta team there was, and that was interesting. That wasn't a cool mascot, but West Michigan Whitecaps is kind of interesting. Lakeland Flying Tigers. The Seawolves, like we touched, and then I played 2 years on the Toledo Mud Hens, which were pretty famous. So I guess MASH made the Mud Hens pretty famous, and they had a pretty cool atmosphere, stadium, the whole deal. They really do a good job there.
How about you, Dan?
Yes, you mentioned I played against the Whitecaps when I was in the Midwest League, and I also played against the Lakeland Tigers in the Florida State League. But I only played for 3 seasons. Rookie ball was Elizabethan, Tennessee, which was, just the Elizabethan Twins. And then I went on to play for the Fort Wayne Wizards in Indiana. Yep. And then from the Wizards, I finished my career, the Fort Myers Miracle. So I didn't really even think about that name until now. Fitting name, even though they let me go, and it was one of the worst days at the time. I believe AA was the Rockettes, the Rockcats, New Britain Rockcats, and then our New Britain, and then the AAA team was the Salt Lake City Buzz at the time. But I wasn't fortunate enough to get that far. But but quick side note to the story. God closes it. We hear the story. He closes the door. He opens a window. In my case, he closed the window and opened a door. Because 2 summers after I got released, I exit the highway because there's traffic. I'm meeting my friends on the beach, and I end up on this beach by myself reading a book, and then she walks by. And now we're going on 25 years of a charmed marriage, not a day that I didn't want to come home, and not a night that I've gone to bed angry. So as ball player, Wade, you're not going to the beach unless you're, playing out in California. Or even if you are, you just don't have time off to do that. So my whole life, spending summers playing travel ball and through high school and college and pros, finally I'm at the beach. And, I wouldn't trade her in for a day in the big leagues or a career.
It's awesome. It's awesome. On the minor league notes, I've got in my house, I don't have it here, but I've got Frederick Keyes gear up here in Maryland. We've got one of the Reds low A ball teams. They've switched hands so many times, but in Greenville, Tennessee, close to where my grandparents live, it was the Greenville Reds. It might be the Greenville Astros now, but when they were the Greenville Reds, it was Mr. Red wearing a Davy Crockett coonskin cap was their logo. It was pretty good.
That's pretty good.
I've got some Pensacola Blue Wahoo stuff. Mm-hmm. One of these days, I'm going to get the Montgomery Biscuits gear, maybe some, I don't know. I think the Auburn Doubledays have one of the best team names after Abner Doubleday, the game's inventor. Right. But I encourage people to go check out Dan's story because it's impossible to cover all the pieces of this, and so much of what happens with you, Dan, happens after you leave the game of baseball. Neena, you do a lot of kind of logging the saga of how your experience of baseball played into this. I've got both of those stories linked in the show notes for this video, but Neena, you've got something extra because you've been writing some stuff for kids. I wonder if you could share that real quick.
Sure. Well, when you marry a professional baseball player, they kind of start talking to you and saying, well, what are your dreams? And I said, well, I'd like to be a writer. And so if you marry somebody who's chasing their dreams and fulfilling it every day, they encourage you to, take some action and do that in your own life. And so Wade has been super encouraging with that. And as we were in baseball, I started writing for Baseball Chapel. And that was that Bible study that we were talking about at the beginning of this. And they have a daily kind of devotion. And so I started, sharpening that skill of writing and using it for the Lord. And then I wrote a novel, a fiction novel called The Bird and the Bees. And it's about this girl who just falls in love with this tall, dark, and handsome third baseman playing for the Erie Seawolves. Where in the world did she come up with that idea, right? But that was my first book, and that came out during COVID in 2020. And then just our relationship with Mary and everything. Then Tan Books publishes a Garden for Mary. And so this...
Oh, good. We got a visual aid. Awesome.
Yeah. Wade's got long arms. But that story really came out of our conversion and how we kind of struggled with the rosary and with devotion to Mary, and why do we venerate her and honor her, and it has this child asking his mother or her mother. In my mind it was a boy, but it's a little girl in the book, but asking his mother, well, why? And I think that's what we were doing. We kept asking on an intellectual level, why do we do this? Tell me again. Let me read it again. Let me see the print and understand it, but it just wasn't connecting with our heart. And then finally, when it connected with our heart, that's when it all clicked and made sense. And so that's where A Garden for Mary came from. And so, yeah, I love writing and love using that for the Lord. And Wade modeled that beautifully. It's a lot of people have a lot of amazing skills that honor and glorify the Lord, but Wade always used his, it was just from his walkout songs, his presence on a ball field, and all these ways he stood out because he was always joyful for the Lord. No matter the seasons that he would jokes and said he was like the Job of baseball. Even then he was joyful.
My last year. It was rough.
Saint Mendoza, pray for us. Yeah. So, you mentioned walk-up songs. This is a question we didn't get to here, but did you use Christian music for your walk-up songs ever, Wade?
I did. I would use country every now and then because I'm from Hallsville, Kentucky, and a redneck. But no, I loved having a walkout song that glorified the Lord, because I would get, it was like an awesome evangelizing technique. Like fans would come up and say, "I can't believe your song is Light Up the Sky by the Afters, or Running for Your Heart by Third Day," or we were Protestant, so I was all over the band music,
Yeah, there's this guy used to play for the Reds, Chris Heisey, and he had this Christian rap song, and it went hard. Let's just say, and all these people are like, man, what's that song that Chris Heisey's like walking up to? That's amazing. It's like it's this band called the Cross Movement, and if you listen to the lyrics, you'll find out exactly what they're about. So no, that's really
well. I must be a lot older than all of you because I didn't have a walk up song. I didn't have that option.
Right. You were there. Did you have a walk up record player, like maybe walk up 8-track, maybe? No, this has been great, y'all. I'm so grateful that you both accepted the invitation. I really encourage people to go check out the links here so you can find out more about all the guests we've had today, Wade, Neena, and Dan. I encourage you to go to CHNetwork.org, find more stories of people and what's brought them either back to the church or maybe into the church from some other tradition of faith or maybe from no faith at all. You can also check out our online community. That's community.chnetwork.org. And again, this is all made possible because of people who love the Lord and want to help out people like you. And if you want to participate in that mission and support others on the journey, you can go to chnetwork.org/donate to do so. I'm Matt Swaim. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Coming Home Network Presents. We'll see you again next time.